Okay, let's talk about the Companies and Allied Matters Act in Nigeria, as well as the securities and investment laws, which provide for the protection of shareholders with minority interests in publicly traded companies. In Nigeria, that seems to hold in theory rather than in practice, at least going by some historical and recent developments. Let's talk to Johnson Chukwu, a chartered trader and CEO at Cowry Asset Management, and he joins me now to chat to this particular issue in relation to good corporate governance. Good evening to you, Johnson. Sir, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Good evening, boss, and thank you for having me.
We appreciate that. Well, then, what is the role of minority shareholders in good corporate governance in publicly traded companies?
The role of minority shareholders is to serve as bulwark to prevent abuse of authority or influence by majority shareholders. As you know, because under corporate governance rules, the majority shareholders basically dominate the management or direction or directorship of the companies. And the minority shareholders' interests in many instances are impeached by majority shareholders who could feather their nest by appointing the management and therefore allowing the organization to be run to their personal interest. So the minority shareholders' interests or the purpose of minority shareholders being in the board or intervening in the management of the company is to ensure that their interests are not injured. And there are enough provisions in the Companies and Allied Matters Act of 2020 as amended, and other rules guiding corporate governance to protect the interests of minority shareholders.
So, in the manner of speaking, you just talked about the CAMA here. Do you think that we have enough protection of minority shareholders, or is it more in theory rather than in practice?
Well, I'll take it from both perspectives. There is enough legal framework to protect minority shareholders. For instance, minority shareholders have the right to call for an annual general meeting or extraordinary general meeting of a company, thereby bypassing the standard rule where the company secretary will call the shareholders meeting. The minority shareholders can write to the company secretariat or company secretary and request for a meeting to be convened if they feel their interest is not being taken care of or being abused, or if they feel that the company is being run for the interests of the minority shareholders. 2, minority shareholders are members of the company's audit committee, board audit committees, even if they are not members of the board. So for every quoted company, the audit committee is composed of minority shareholders and other shareholders. And audit committees of quoted companies are headed by the independent shareholder, who is not supposed to have any financial interest in the operation of the company. These are basically to protect minority interests, the interests of minority shareholders. So there's enough provisions under the existing laws, other CAMA and other regulations that govern the corporate governance of companies to protect minority shareholders. In practice, there are some deviations. I wouldn't say that that's the rule or that's the norm, but there are some deviations. And those deviations come about because there are instances where the major shareholders or major shareholders influence the nomination of who the minority shareholders will elect to represent them in the audit committee of the company. Secondly, there are instances where the minority shareholders influence the election of the independent director into the board of directors. So where the minority shareholders had undue influence in electing those people, he basically influenced their decisions and actions on the board.
So, but do you think that minority shareholders have the muscle to face the domineering influence of a few rich, powerful shareholders on the board?
Well, I don't think if it's a case of confrontation, if the law does not give them enough cover that they can confront the majority shareholder. It's very simple. Look at how the boards are composed. The boards are composed based on the number of shares you hold. So, for instance, some company will say if you have up to 5% of shareholding, you can nominate a director. Some say if you have up to 10% of shareholding, you nominate a director. So if you say 10%, up to 10% of shareholding, so you have a maximum board of 10, then plus independent directors and the minority elected directors. So you find out that those directors elected by the major shareholders dominate the board. And because elections or votes in the board is based on majority number, simple majority. So the votes of majority shareholders will in most instances overwhelm the votes of the minority shareholders. Even if you have to, if you really come to the annual general meeting and a votes are based on number of shareholding you hold, majority shareholders will still triumph over minority shareholders. But that's why the CAMA has built some safeguards to protect the interests of minority shareholders. But it is not what they can exact on their own strength. It is because the law has provided them some protections, and those protections are to ensure appropriate and appropriate corporate governance within the country.
Okay, so when we look at Nigeria's scenario, for example, do you think shareholders groupings or associations of shareholders can form this very strong bulwark you talked about at the opening of this interview around their own interests in terms of corporate governance issues? Do you think the shareholders groupings represent that? Do they have enough force in ensuring board effectiveness and their protection?
Well, because I sit on a board of a couple of companies, some of them quoted companies, I can tell you that they have a lot of influence. If you come to annual general meetings, particularly when the general meetings were physical, the shareholders groups exert so much influence in reviewing, analyzing, and questioning the actions of the directors. Unfortunately, with the virtual platforms that we have today, I don't think that influence will be as strong as it used to be, because it is now left for the company secretary to elect to allow any of the directors, any of the shareholders to speak, because they are not physically over there. When they were physical, they can consider themselves to nuisance if you don't allow them to speak. And they made sure that they drove their points home, particularly where companies were having poor management. But the fact is that these pressure groups, or this body of shareholders, trade groups as you may call them, have very significant impact on corporate governance. They are also the ones that elect the minority directors to the board, and also the ones that elect their representative or shareholder representative to the board audit committees. So, and they will always elect those shareholders who have very strong knowledge of financial matters. So they have a lot of influence.
Okay. Let's leave it there for today. Thank you so much for your time. Johnson Chukwu, a licensed trader and CEO at Cowry Asset Management. Thank you for speaking to us on the role of minority shareholders in board effectiveness and corporate governance. Thank you.